Hi, it's Friday afternoon. Time for our last presentation by me on my assignment about Romans, which today is Romans 5, the entire chapter. Let me say this as I begin, because there are so many things to cover in this, and they're so crucial as far as explanation is concerned, I am not going to read the chapter aloud. If you're not familiar with what it says, I would suggest that you turn this off, read the chapter, and turn it back on, and we go through the discussion. What I'm going to do is to pick selections from the 5th chapter that I think especially need to be talked about. I was 10 years old, going on 11, and I'm in the 5th grade. It's the first day of school. I did not know the woman who was the teacher before. In the class, one of the classes that we did that particular day, the first day, was geography. That's an area where I happen to be particularly uneducated, was then, am now. But she began by asking the question, can you tell me, who can tell me, the two rivers that border what used to be called Mesopotamia and is now called Iraq? Up goes my hand. I knew the Tigris and Euphrates, and I was just terribly surprised that nobody in the class could answer that, but she could not see my hand. I did not get to answer that question. I think it's kind of interesting and revealing that I still remember that as an old man from the time when I was 11 years old. What I somehow deduced from her reaction or lack of it, which was subsequently borne out in the rest of the year and in lots of other situations, is that she was not for me. Now, let me quickly say that I recognize she had a job that was virtually impossible to teach a bunch of 5th graders and try to impart knowledge and wisdom, having to deal with all different kinds of personalities. That's hard, and was then and still is. And she had to deal with me, and my perception of her perception of what she had to do with me was keep me under control. Whatever that meant then, whatever it means now. But I want to emphasize the thing of that I perceived she was not for me. A couple of weeks ago, I used the illustration of taking exams in graduate school. I had gone through all kinds of barriers, all kinds of resistance, and I was almost through. And it dawned on me that these guys mean for me to get a doctor's degree. They were for me. Probably the finest experience of that for those of us who are long-time married people is when we first realized that the person we were courting was going to be our partner, that this was going to succeed and they were going to be for us. And as a marriage counselor over the years, I saw situations where that was not how it was and the marriage wasn't going to work. In chapter 5, we are told, as a continuation of what we've been doing, and as a preface to stuff that's going to be done in 6 and following, God is for us. He is on our side. God has made great arrangements, gone to a lot of trouble, but beyond that is inclined to be for us. Now, obviously there are a lot of things that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want to do, be however you want to be, and that's perfectly okay. We're not saying that. We've all had the adult experience, and we still do, I'm sure, of people who pretend to be on our side they're for us, they like us, they love us, they want good things to happen to us, and that's not how they actually feel. And so, because we see people who rejoice in unrighteousness and misfortune, but to know that somebody, and especially God, is on your side, there's nothing as good as that. So we're going to explore that in this 5th chapter. I have picked out 3 main emphases in chapter 5, and I'm going to talk about them, some grammatically and some psychologically and some theologically. And then far down in the chapter, in verse 12 and following, there is a very knotty problem, and we'll talk about that in some detail and some length as we get to it. First of all, let me read this little snippet beginning at the chapter. Therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Justification and peace with God. Back to the little snippet that I said about being a marriage counselor. Dealt with hundreds and hundreds of people who were not at peace with themselves, with each other, with the world. There were all kinds of chaotic situations, all kinds of definitions. It seemed to me that it was a perpetual learning experience for me, as it seemed to me that people came up with new ways not to be at peace. One of my earliest revelations was that many older people who are long-term married folk stay married so they'll have somebody to fight with, somebody to despise. They really don't care about each other, don't care about marriage or being married to that person, but they need somebody to be out of snuff with, as my grandma liked to say. All of us have had the experience, I'm sure, in relationships of all kinds, where we perceived that whoever we were dealing with was not happy with us. And so we may have asked the question, what are you mad about? And of course the answer always is, well, nothing. I'm not bad about anything. The history of mankind can be charted by a search for God. We've always had the notion that there's another world that we can't see, and that world may not be happy with us. We look at the clouds and we see possible figures there that could have some kind of life and consciousness about them, and all kinds of situations when there are storms and cataclysms and difficulties of all kinds. And we're afraid that there's another world that's just not happy with us at all. And we've wanted to do what we could to mollify that, to change that situation. Conflict, anger, unhappiness. Paul's point is that because we are justified by faith, we have peace. Peace with God, peace in ourselves, peace with the world. Nothing much better than that. Judy and I use sayings from the lives of our children and grandchildren when we want to make jokes or when we want to comment about something. Our step-grandson was a live wire, always a little bit on the edge of getting in trouble. A couple of things that we always talk about him. He walked in the kitchen one day in his folks' house. The roof had leaked and there was water in the middle of the floor. And he very quickly said, "I did not do that." He recognized that, of course, he was going to get accused and he had done something. He wasn't sure what he had done, but he wanted to deny that and get his word in that he wasn't responsible. The other one that really tickles us, they had some kittens, and he was responsible for one of them getting killed. When my son Trey saw that, he said, "What happened to this kitten?" And his reply was, "He fell down like this." So now when we see something that's amiss, it's upset or whatever, well, we make the joke, "He fell down like this." This business of being not at peace reminds me of being in the 8th grade. Along about the time you're in the 8th grade, it seems like everything flies loose, nothing works. Everything is changing. You don't understand anything that's going on, but you feel like you know everything better than anybody else. And things are very contradictory. And I remember vividly at that time in my life, on the one hand, I was deeply religious, wanted to please my parents, wanted to please especially my preacher and the people at church. And on the other hand, was doing and saying things that were so unspeakable, as I thought of it then and as I kind of think of it now. It was like, what in the world was that all about? There was not peace there. There was discomfort and chaos, and we've been looking in all kinds of ways at all times for peace. In the counseling room, that's what the people are looking for with each other. Can we calm down and find peace with one another? Back to the 8th grade for just a second. When I was a full-time local minister, why, I obviously dealt with 8th grade people. And as I was quitting that, I made a deal with God. If you won't make me teach any more 8th graders and handle them, I'll get out of the ministry and not mess up any more churches. And so far, we've both kept our bargain. One of the things that people are searching for in the counseling room or in the worship room or wherever they are, having the deep thoughts and searching is, I need to know that things are okay. I'm going to say more about that later, because there is a time and place when people can really be told things really are okay. And I think that that's sort of the message that Paul has when he says, because we are justified by faith, we have peace. A second of these little snippets. We can talk about things being okay, but somebody who is facing a feedback report on a cancer test is not going to be at ease. Or when somebody's lost all their money, or when divorce has happened, or when they're angry with their neighbors, when people are at war, and on all the human situations, we ask the question, what is to be done about my plight? How can things in my life be better? That's always what people are looking for in the counseling room or wherever we're doing that kind of activity. Years ago, Judy and I went to see a movie called Dear Heart, starring Glenn Ford and Geraldine Page. These two ordinary folk, both postmasters, went to a convention. There was a love interest going on. Things weren't necessarily going well. And when things weren't happening to suit her, Geraldine Page, the lead girl, cried out, "Somebody's got to do something about me." This 5th chapter is very plain about somebody doing something about my plight. First of all, there is a doctrine of great importance, but that is not particularly easily understood by us, and that's this. Paul says you should consider your suffering as an opportunity for rejoicing. Wait just a minute. I'm supposed to be glad that things are not going well for me? We're not sure exactly what was happening to them at the moment. There were lots of isolated and small persecutions going on at the time Romans was written, mostly from Jews toward Christians, but others as well, some governmental. And they had to do something about that. First of all, he provides a mental and behavioral remedy. We rejoice because of suffering, because suffering produces endurance. When you've stood something, you know you can continue to stand it, which produces character. Character is what you really are when nobody is looking. It's the real you. It's not what you're presenting, but it's you. It gives you character. And character gives you hope. And there are not things much better than hope. So, while it's hard to think of, his point is that suffering produces hope, which is a good thing. At OCC, we had this kind of a joke when we were taking a reading of the faculty on some issue, which wasn't going to get any votes. Somebody would say, I'll count them on this side, you get them over there by the door. So we'll count up on everybody here who can rejoice easily because of trouble. But I need to say at this point, I really can say to people in the counseling room, or to people listening to this, or to people in church or wherever, everything is okay. Now here's why. Christianity is called by historians an eschatological religion, which means that all of history is moving somewhere to a goal. That's individually and collectively. That goal is when this world isn't anymore and the other one is in place. Eschatological religion. What happens at the end? I can't promise the person waiting for the test about cancer that things are going to be okay about that. I can't promise the person that's lost all their money that they're going to get it back. I can't promise success at every venture that we undertake, our happiness, our friendship, or any of those things. Obviously, we work on things that we can do to make those things happen best we can. But everything is not going to be fixed until the end. But they are going to be fixed. So that whatever else happens, we know that things are okay. That things are going to a place where they will be okay. Paul's viewpoint about this life is that it's a passing thing. It's a kind of a way station on the way to the other life, so that things are going to be okay. Number 3. He says, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. He goes through an interesting literary sequence about what people will do for somebody else. You don't see people going around volunteering to die for somebody else. They might if somebody's particularly good and all that. But at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly while we were enemies. I want to phrase in for a little bit on that thing, that at the right time. Biblically, that is said different ways. Sometimes it is the fullness of time. Sometimes it's the right season. And it's thought of in different ways. But the thought is that when everything is just exactly right, this should happen. If you're a serious cook, you know that when you're preparing something, there is a moment when it's better than it's ever going to be again. If you go past that, or if you quit before that, it won't quite be perfect. Every once in a while you get lucky and you take it off at exactly the right moment. If you're a farmer, there's a time to plant. It'll never be better than that. If you do it before that, it'll be worse. If you do it afterwards, it'll be later. Perhaps one of the main considerations about that would be war. You may have seen the movie not too long ago, Dunkirk, the time when the Germans had all the British Expeditionary Force on the beach at Dunkirk, and they had a chance to destroy Britain. Historians generally think that had Hitler chosen to go ahead and do what he probably had the ability to do at Dunkirk, he would have knocked England out of the war. But he didn't, and so it didn't happen. That was the right time for that. If you're an antique collector, you know that there's a right time to make an offer for a certain antique piece. Judy and I have had that happen a lot. Couldn't buy it before, couldn't buy it later at that price, but we got it right there. That just exactly at the right time, Christ did an unlikely thing for unlikely candidates. Just exactly what we needed, and because of that, we will be saved through his sacrifice. That term saved has lots of meanings. Sometimes it means you've been relieved of sin, relieved of guilt. Sometimes it means you've been rescued from something perilous. But when you take it in all of its meanings, it means that whatever needed doing for you has been done, and far beyond what you could imagine. And his act saved us through reconciliation. Now, I said there's a knotty problem in this chapter, and I've got to deal with that for a few minutes here, so be patient with me because I may sound like a teacher, so everybody can promptly go to sleep. In 5:12, he says this: "Therefore, as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men, because all men sinned." We've laughed before about me cooking at this restaurant in Abilene during my last years in college. The Dixie Pig, 4 different times that year, because I was taking Romans under famous scholar J.D. Thomas, I went home and I and others spent the night finishing up a paper about 4 really hard passages in Romans. The first one being Romans 5:12. This one particular night, we'd had a school bus that was coming in, and we were going to feed 45 kids Dixie Pig sandwiches, roast pork sandwich with sauce on a toasted bun. We made too many. They were left over. They let me take them home, and so they sat there all night and we ate on them all night in the next morning till we got our paper done about that sin came into the world and death through sin because all men sinned. Let me talk Greek for just a second. I took 21 hours of Greek, so every once in a while I need to say something about it. The phrase, all men sinned, means, in the Greek, that at one time, everybody who ever lived or ever will live sinned at once. It's called the aorist tense, meaning kind of action. It's point action. Now that is really hard. How could people not born, people dead, whatever, at one time sin together? So that it caused death. One of the things we know, and we're not very happy about, we find out when we're about 5 years old that everybody's going to die. Death rate's 100%. When our son Trey was about 5 or so, I was putting him to bed one night. He was prone to ask hard questions, was then, still is. And he said to me, "Dad, tell me why everybody dies." Well, I started giving him a naturalistic explanation of growth, decay, death. And after I did that for a little while, he said, no, Dad, we die because we all sin." Oh, okay, yeah, right. Now that's led to a lot of different things. First of all, for unbelievers, that's just nonsense. They just cast that away and say, "Oh, that's just somebody talking. That people die because they're part of nature, and anything that lives dies." People who are believers divide into various camps about it. A great many Christian folk would say this in terms of original sin. When a baby is born, they are born tainted with the presence and the fact of sin. Now, that's hard to think about. And for most of us, that's not something that we can't handle that. We're not going to accept that. What then? One of the best explanations, the best explanation that I've encountered over the years with this is the notion of corporate personality. Now, what that presumes is that in the ancient days, the way of thinking about cause and effect and similar things was fundamentally different than the way it is now. An illustration. Biblically, God can be credited with doing something at the same time that man is credited with doing it. Let's take Moses and Pharaoh. We're told that Pharaoh hardened his heart, God hardened his heart. Who did it? Was it God or Pharaoh? The answer to the ancient man is yes. Now, our thinking doesn't work very well there, but nevertheless, there they are. The notion of corporate personality is that one person can act on behalf of whatever group we're talking about, and in this case, Adam acted on behalf of everyone who ever lived or ever will live. And then, of course, he goes on to say, Jesus acted on behalf of everyone to defeat what Adam did. But back to the language. Corporate personality, also the what is true for the one is true for the all. What is true for the all is true for the one. So that one man can act for a whole nation, or a whole nation can act for one man. Now that's a little hard for us. Can you think of these college boys sitting there in this apartment, eating these pork sandwiches, trying to explain that and make sense out of it to a teacher who already knew what he thought about it, and probably wasn't going to be too impressed with what we said? Wasn't then, probably wouldn't be now. But that apparently is how he was thinking, and so it is up to us to formulate that for ourselves. We don't think babies die when they die because of sin, but we do believe that all of the world has death because of sin. However you explain to yourself about Adam and Eve and all that stuff in the beginning, and there are about as many ways to explain that as there are people who go about it. When my family or friends talk about that, they always want to explain it to me and not hear what I've got to say about it. I guess I don't blame them for that. But Adam brought sin, and because he brought sin, he brought death. We deal with death, every one of us, every family, every group, large and small. But he goes on here and in later writing in Romans to explain that Christ brought life. And so we look forward to the time when we will no longer be characterized by death, but by life. Well, we need a whole lot longer to talk about that, but our time is up. Thank you all for letting me teach these 4 weeks. I still look forward to seeing you and being with you in person. Let's pray. Lord, bless us individually and collectively. May we be true believers, and may we live as you wish us to live until the time when we get together with you. In Jesus' name, amen.